welcome to another episode of our Halloween movie madness marathon. Say that 5 times fast. Yes, we're here again because we all go a little mad sometimes. And so we're here this week to talk about one of the defining movies in horror movie history. Talk about none other than Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock. There's so many lines, so many classic moments, so many shots, camera shots. Just so much of this movie has been used over and over again in the horror genre. But before we get to that, before we start talking about the film, I need to introduce my co-host. So I'm going to introduce our guest first. He is a writer for Omen Comics. He's also a writer for Blood World from my Raincross Press. He's a very talented man and a horror movie aficionado who has his own horror podcast now as well, which I'll let him plug when he comes on. I'm talking about none other than the man behind Bjorn the Barbarian, Michael Nunnally. How you doing, Michael? Yeah.
Hey, how's it going? As you mentioned, a quick little plug to my podcast there. I'm on a horror podcast, kind of an infotainment thing with my friend James Caudill, and we talk about horror pretty in depth. It's called Countless Corpses Podcast.
Yeah, you guys got to check that out. Make sure you look for it and subscribe to it. Check out. They are on Twitter as well. Great stuff. We got to keep horror movies alive throughout the whole year, although this is the season. So, meanwhile, although I do have to say, for Christmas, maybe we will cover Krampus, which I actually like that movie. A lot of people don't like it, but we'll see. But it looks like one of my other co-hosts, Norman, might have gotten him, but hopefully he makes it back. But I will introduce our surviving co-host right now. He is also a writer for Omen Comics and also writes at Revelation Comics, Blitz, the Blitzverse. He is part of that. He's also a writer for Blood World from Raincross Press. He does all sorts of great reviews and articles for Comic Crusaders and is on several podcasts with me. I'm talking about none other than the incomparable. Yes, incomparable. We use big words over here on Cinema Crusaders. Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
Doing all right. I'm actually looking forward to this one. Alfred Hitchcock is my favorite director, and this is definitely among his best, so I can't wait to get into this one.
Now, Lance is off filming right now. He is doing audio for one of his feature films, so we hope to have Lance back soon, but all the best, Lance. And I think Norman or his mother may have gotten Jeff Bracey, but when he comes back, I will bring him in and give him the intro. So I'm not quite sure what happened, but I'm sure that Jeff will make an appearance again. So when he comes back, we'll bring him in. But until then, we're going to jump right into Psycho from Alfred Hitchcock. But before we do that, wait a minute. I heard that familiar beep in my head. It means he got away from Norman. So I'm going to introduce him now. He is an artist extraordinaire. He's the creator of Mr. Happy, as well as Fellhand in Blood World from Raincross Press. He's a writer and an artist, a dual threat. He's a man who knows all sorts of details. I'm talking about none other than the one, the only, the great, the handsome. Really? Did I say that? Yes, Jeff Bracey. How you doing, Jeff?
It's all true.
I think Carlsruhe came out there for a minute.
Is it spring already?
Yes, it is spring here in California.
If you don't know what we're talking about, please follow the Fellowship of the D20 to see these 3 marvelous people playing a rousing game of D&D in the minds of Fandelver.
And if
no,
you
the quest of the Phandalin 5.5.
5.5.
Right.
Spring Karlsruhe always has a flower in his hair. That's all we'll say. So, anyway, before we get into Psycho, I have to ask this question because as I watched this movie and as we've watched the movies that we've done so far, it occurred to me that, the first movie we did, Exorcist, is a horror movie staple. And it's got all those classic horror elements that we usually associate. Then we watched Seven, which was definitely a crime psychological thriller that had some gore elements in it. And here is the quintessential psychological thriller. So my question for you, but yet most people consider this a horror movie. So going around the horn, started with Mike, what makes a horror movie? What is a horror movie? Because it really begs the question, if The Exorcist could be a horror movie and Rosemary's Baby can be a horror movie, but at the same time Psycho could be a horror movie, then what makes a horror movie? And I'll go to Mike first. What do you think? What makes a horror movie for you?
That's interesting. I always looked at Psycho as more of a like a slasher.
Yeah.
I mean, I could talk about the elements that make it that for certain. There is certainly it's the creepiness factor. I think at least is part of it. I mean, like with Norman doing the whole peeping Tom thing through the wall there, and then with the multiple personalities thing, and then with the murders there's a bit of a stalking thing that going on there that it's very light, but in a way it's very has that kind of a feel to it, and that's very key to like a slasher kind of a movie. But I think horror really comes into play when you start dealing with blood.
Okay. Because, I was going to say, it's like you definitely have that suspense and tension in it. But I think if you had asked the average person out there what a horror movie is, they'd say that horror movie is usually for kids or those sick individuals who never grew up, who love to see scary stuff or monsters or people getting hacked up and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot more to it, as we're seeing from the movies that we're watching here. But I want to hear what your guys' definitions are as well. So I'm going to go to Steve. What is a horror movie to you? What do you think makes a horror movie?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is just in the name. The idea is that it's really playing on fear and dread, trying to use the situations and whatnot to instill fear in the audience, and I think you definitely get that with this movie. I mean, not only, maybe like the first half hour or so, it doesn't really do that, but it's trying to build up the tension, and you're trying to fear for the character, whether or not she's going to get out of it alive. Spoiler, she doesn't. And then after that, it's really, you get that classic shower scene.
Film.
Yeah. I mean, you get that classic, that classic shower scene, which, I mean, really absolutely is effective in being a scare fest. And it establishes the threat of this character, Norman Bates, tremendously. And so when he comes in, kills again, which I won't spoil because that one probably won't be as memorable to a lot of people. It really kind of hits hard because we've already seen that, what a scary creature this is. So a lot of it is about that. But I would also say like Norman Bates is like your classic movie monster in many ways. He is a killer who, a certain type that he preys on. He uses fear in anticipation of his killings. All of these sorts of elements. And I think the mystery surrounding Norman and why he does what he does creates more of the fear of the unknown, which Lovecraft famously talked about, in one of his articles that he wrote about this. And so a lot of that comes together, the idea of, we don't know much about Norman Bates. And because we don't know much about him, we fear him more. And so the movie plays to that fear. As the main characters are trying to figure out, or the later main characters are trying to figure out what he is. So I think a lot of it, but I think it really comes down to fear and the unknown, and you have plenty of both.
So you're saying that? Oh, go ahead.
I have a question about that. Like for instance, Jaws comes to mind. I've been told that is a thriller and not a horror, although I would classify it as a horror. That uses both what I said, blood, as well as what you said, the fear of the unknown and the using fear the scenes to instill fear in the audience there. But what out of those? I mean, is it the combination of the things we're talking about, or is it? I mean, do you see what I mean? There is it.
Yeah,
I
would
where
classify
does that line go?
Jaws is a classic monster movie. It's just that the monster happens to be a shark.
Yeah, and right? I think this really is why I decided to ask the question, which is I think horror gets a bad rap because I think what a lot of moviegoers or movie buffs hear the word horror, they think it cheapens whatever it's attached to a lot of the times if they're not a horror aficionado. And I think that's absolutely unfair, because horror is a big tent that includes suspense, psychological thriller, monster movies, a whole host of other things. All of those fall under horror. Paranormal is horror, paranormal movies, movies that deal with demonic possession, things like that, where you might, like The Fallen isn't necessarily gory or anything, but I would say it's most definitely a horror movie. The Fallen with Denzel Washington, and John Goodman. So that is a horror movie, but that doesn't fall into your classic, it's not even scary in the way that The Exorcist is scary. It's scary in a whole other different element. The Omen kind of combine those two. So you have those different aspects in there. So let me go to Jeff, though. What do you think makes a horror movie? What is the definition of a horror film?
Well, first of all, of course, you're all wrong.
Okay.
Let me explain why. This movie is not a horror movie, and Seven's not a horror movie. They are thrillers. This can arguably be seen as a slasher, perhaps even the first slasher, if you will. It's still, by the standards of slashers, it's a little tame as slashers progressed. Even like the what I quintessentially count as the first slasher film is Halloween, as opposed to this, which has a body count of 5. That's still not that many in terms of body counts, but it's not about the body count. And while you do say a lot of things can be under the horror umbrella, a lot of those things I don't necessarily count as horrors, like psychological thrillers or suspense movies. I see them rated in the horror category, but I don't count them as horror, because horror has to be something that elicits a visceral response. And to Mike's point, this is why blood is often an important ingredient. Now, it doesn't have to be there. Halloween is very unbloody and ungory, but it is a horrifying film because of the aspect of the stalking. Now, in this case, we have Norman Bates and the disturbance in his head and the anticipation of something going on. And when you look at things like Jaws, that is a visceral primal terror, and that can elicit horror. So when I look at movies that I would classify as horror, I'm looking for movies that do elicit a sense of horror or terror. And that doesn't mean they have to have a supernatural element, although that's always welcome. If you look at a movie like The Strangers, the idea of a home invasion just for the purpose of hunting and killing whoever's in the house, that is a horrifying concept. And that's what I personally define horrors as. They have to be things that truly horrify, that terrify, that engage us in that primal lizard brain kind of level. And like with Jaws, even though it's a man versus nature sort of story, it's kind of an adventure. The visceral connection to something preying on us and eating us, that does elicit horror. So that's how I view horror.
Well, while I agree with your definition to a certain extent, I would say that even
You're still wrong.
Movies like Psycho and Seven, to name two that we did last week and then we're gonna do this week. The first time you watch Psycho, the first time you watch Seven, the suspense that builds through the whole movie, that sense of dread and anticipation,
I still don't necessarily count that as horror. Not like if I look at the French film, for instance, Inside, where this woman is stalking a pregnant woman because she's lost her child and she's trying to claim someone else's child. And so the intention she has is to rip the child from this woman's belly. That's horrifying. And it takes us a while to get there. So at first you think it's some sort of invasion, some sort of psycho, some sort of slasher. But by the end you realize, this is horror without a doubt.
I have to say something. The problem with that definition, Jeff, is that it makes it entirely subjective, as opposed to being able to classify movies as this is horror and this isn't. It makes it about what is horrifying to the individual.
Everything we've said so far is subjective. Nim's definition is subjective. Yours is. Steve's is. Everything is subjective in terms of what generates absolute fear, what generates terror, what generates horror.
Well, and that's why I asked the question, and I also asked the question because I attended Screamfest this week, and it's a horror film festival, And there are a number of movies, and some of them I cared for, and some I didn't. Some were absolutely strange, like the one that I watched from Japan, which was really weird.
That's Japan.
But there was one movie in particular that I loved, which I wouldn't have classified as horror, and was in this horror film festival. And it was an absolutely wonderful movie, but it was a murder mystery set in medieval Europe. But because of the sense of suspense in it, and because of some of the nature of the kills in the movie, they class it is an award-winning film in a horror film festival. So, like you said, it's so varied, and I think horror is a big umbrella.
Yeah, I mean, like I've seen Silence of the Lambs classified as horror, and again, I think that's psychological thriller, and that's why I had the caveat is like this is how I define horror.
Right.
So again, you're all wrong. I'm right.
I would like to say though, for the as far as the record of when the slasher genre started, it technically started in April of 1960 with the British film Peeping Tom. I'll tell you guys about that if you want, but let's just say it sucked. A couple months later,
Psycho is way better. Psycho's the one that popularized it.
Yeah, a couple of months later in June, Psycho came out.
Thank
and
God for
Psycho
Hitchcock.
is considered actually is heralded as the start of the slasher genre. But
yet,
technically, time-wise, Peeping Tom did come out first.
I think you can look at it that way because what became a trope of the quote-unquote horror slashers, because there's plenty of movies out there about psychotic murderers that you would, again, look at as suspense movies or thriller movies. What became a standardized trope of it, starting in the late 70s, was the killer in a costume or a mask. And you can look at Psycho in that context because Norman plays dress up. He has an alternate personality that he does.
Now,
right. But also in 1978, when Halloween came out, that was the start of what they call the golden age of slashers.
Yeah.
So I mean that Halloween brought it to another level, for sure.
And I'll be perfectly frank. I've never been a huge fan of slasher movies as a genre. I mean, there are some that I've enjoyed, but that's not my forte. You know, there are some that I'll watch, but that said, and Psycho as a slasher is very tame. I mean, really, let's be perfectly honest.
It is much more psychological and suspense oriented.
But it's all about that creeping dread that makes this a classic.
Yeah, and I do want to cover the plot a little bit because I don't think we should give short shrift to the plot, but I think we need to really cover some other things first to build into the plot. And so one of the things I want to cover is so this movie it's amazing to me to say that this movie is 62 years old, you know. But then even more amazing to me is the first movie we covered from Halloween Movie Madness was The Exorcist. So contrast this movie and how groundbreaking it was and how liberating it was for the horror genre and people who wanted to create horror movies. And then just 11 years later, what they were able to do in The Exorcist, you know? So, I mean, really think about that because this movie, and I'm going to go around the horn and I want you guys to talk a little bit about this movie's influence on you, what you see as its influence on film even today. But, you know, you think about this movie had the first couple in it in a sex scene in the same bed. It had a woman in a bra, which was unheard of. It had a graphic, you know, for the time, a graphic killing shown. It showed simulated blood.
Of a naked woman.
Yeah. It had a transvestite show up, you know, or a man in a woman's clothes. All of these things were unheard of. And it was only because the relaxed. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're talking about the Hays Code,
so,
right?
You know, yeah. So all of this was absolutely groundbreaking. And then, you know, we went through the 60s and it built up. And then suddenly the 70s came upon us and horror just exploded, you know, and it just kept going from there. So it really is an amazing trailblazer in the sense that it gave much more leeway to people to be able to do some really interesting things that were being explored in the 20s and 30s. They just didn't have the technology to do it at the time. And then film kind of went into a lockdown for a long time. So with
Well, it
that
was the kind
said,
of stuff that EC Comics was doing for years in comics, until the comic code came around and the Wortham hearings and all those sorts of things. And then,
yeah,
so that's really why you got all of these, codes against blood and whatnot. And I think if we're in the decades since, they keep pushing back against them until they finally fell.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to point out, you mentioned that the horror kind of exploded in the 70s. The Hays Code ended in 1968.
yeah.
I mean, bam! The only thing holding them all back ended just a couple of years.
It led right into Grindhouse.
And so even though we love to talk to you about these movies, we also like to talk to you about the history of cinema. And this was a never-ending battle, and I think that I think it's an important thing for newer viewers to realize is that the people that came before you fought these fights, and we shouldn't go backwards. We had the moral majority in the 80s and 90s that were trying to cover things. I mean, they were trying to censor Looney Tunes, for God's sake. We had a whole host of things that doesn't. And so
now they're trying to censor certain Looney Tunes again.
Yes. So, that said, I do want to go around because I want to talk about this movie's influence and its importance to you personally and how you see it as its importance to the genre and to movies as a whole. And I'm going to start with Steve first. What do you think, Steve, about this movie's influence and its importance?
I have kind of evolved a little bit on this because when I first discovered this movie, I really kind of thought it was a bit overrated. I gradually changed my mind over that over time once I see how influential it was, what it was able to do. This movie has absolutely been a huge influence on the entire slasher genre. I know we've talked about it on RRP with Mike. And certainly if you look at Friday the 13th, that is a complete inversion of the Psycho formula. If you look at Halloween, that was Psycho taken up to 11. I'm sure there are plenty of other examples that you guys could probably throw out and come up with examples. But just the very idea of the slasher villain came from this movie. And I think, the idea that the monster sort of evolves from there, as, people kept pushing against the Hays Code. And, as that went by the wayside and they really started getting in how horrific it was. But it was a necessary stepping stone from that to characters like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger and whatnot. So, based on the, the entire historical element of the slasher, I think Psycho Ozzy is basically the movie that all those movies owe a huge creative debt to, because I don't think they would exist in the way that we see it now if not for this movie. Me personally, I always liked Alfred Hitchcock's approach to psychological horror. I like his whole approach when it comes to showing less, but doing more in terms of theater of the mind. We're not necessarily seeing, Norman / Janet Leigh open in this graphic way, but the way it's shot is so artful and it's so elegant, that you can fill in the blanks yourself. And that's great. And likewise with the murder of the second victim later on. And it's like, all you really see is him, is this character falling, and you're seeing it from like maybe, shoulders up for the most part. But you hear the thud and you see the body landing on the floor and it's just, you can kind of realize like in your head how horrific that fall was and how horrific that death was. Just with those sorts of elements, those kinds of things, the way that it's paced and the way that it parcels out information until you finally see, the horrific secrets that Norman is hiding and how all the characters find this out. I mean, all these are really great elements that, I've been able to sort of, borrow little bits and pieces of. And I really, but I mean, Alfred Hitchcock was a master. I mean, this is a guy who made like 50 movies over the course of 60 years. And he had refined his craft by that point, to the point where he could make, classic after classic for years, like he did in the 50s and early 60s. And so, this is pretty much the culmination of that long career which he spent, learning how to use the camera in just the right way and knowing what to show, what not to show.
See, now, interestingly for me, I always thought The Birds was a scarier movie when I was a kid than Psycho. So
I hate The Birds because plot wise it makes no sense, but I totally get the imagery of it.
I'm just saying, every time I saw a ton of crows on the power lines outside my house, I was like, yeah, no. Like, I've seen this movie, and I know what you are up to out there. Real quick before I go to Jeff, I will say one of the things I was going to bring up was that I think that this film allowed Rod Serling to do The Twilight Zone and then the Outer Limits and things like that. And I think The Twilight Zone, and not only that, up until this point, most horror movies and science fiction was about the alien or the monster. And this movie, and then Twilight Zone often explored this concept that the monster is us, which is just such an incredible, way to open up a new genre, a new way to explore horror or suspense or whatever you want to call it, or whatever genre you're writing, and you even look at, it's debatable, but Michael Myers and Jason and, Hannibal Lecter, all of those things, I think, owe a lot to this idea that the protagonist can be a human being who is monstrous.
I mean, the antagonist.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Jeff, what do you think? What about the importance of this movie, the influence of this movie, etc.?
Well, to the point you just made, I'll say that this actually is nothing new. If you look back to films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which had Caesar the Somnambulist, and what was the other one? The classic M, which was about a child predator.
That was in the 1920s, though, right?
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah. But it's everything old is new again.
Right.
And so, Peter Lorre stars in that film as a serial killer who has a predilection for murdering children. And so the idea of the human monster is not all that new, even in the context of a suspenseful thriller horror sort of film. So I'm sure Hitchcock was aware of that, as any good maker of films will be a student of films. Now, looking at what he did here, though, you can clearly see the impact. One of the most brilliant things he does is he kills his lead halfway through the film. This had a gigantic impact on film industry in particular. Up until this time,
Wes Craven ripped it off twice.
Well, I'm saying an impact on the audience, because back in the day, people used to just stroll into the movies like halfway in. They didn't care. They just kind of went, I'll go to the movie. I'll catch like the meat and potatoes of it. They weren't too interested in the build-up. So they see this movie, Janet Leigh starring, this will be great. It's like they get into the film like, what do you mean Janet Leigh's dead? Like, what how did Janet, what's going on here? Who's this Norman Bates guy? I don't know what's going on. And it changed the way people went to movies forevermore. Nobody wanted to miss the opening of a film anymore after that. It was a very bold move. Furthermore, you can see how this influences films like Alien, where Tom Skerritt is set up as the lead of that film. Then halfway through the film, he is gone, and a new lead has to take the place in Sigourney Weaver. And if you look at how this is a wonderful slow burn, Bates doesn't even figure into the plot till halfway through the movie. The first kill only happens halfway through the movie. And it was kind of funny. Like I hadn't watched the film a long time, and realizing like, wow, we went this far, and thinking in the context of today, how like they'd kind of be in a rush to get to a kill, or maybe they'd start with like a little gut punch of a preamble kill to get your attention. Now I can build things. But Hitchcock took the move to build up the characters, to build up the situation, to show all the conflict within Janet Leigh as she's going through all this. And even, tragically, even to have that redemptive moment, she's like, you know what, I'm going to go back. I'm going to make things right. But she doesn't get that chance. All of this, groundbreaking, like you said, groundbreaking. And we can see how these sort of things have also affected directors like Ty West, who has become the quintessential master of the slow burn of the modern era. So yeah, this is a very impactful film on many, many people, and just Hitchcock in general. Like films classes study his style and his method of building suspense and his camera work and his pacing. So it's all there. It's a total package. It's a film course in and of itself.
Now, before I get to Mike, you brought up something that I did want to bring up in this little interlude here, which was his camera work. And I'm going to bring up another director who, at first glance, doesn't seem Hitchcockian at all. But I think that if you studied the way he uses the camera, you could see the influence of Hitchcock on him, especially the way he uses the camera in the, and you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about the minute I say this, the Ash Campbell movies. The way Sam Raimi uses the camera is very much his interpretation of the way Hitchcock uses the camera for effect.
Yeah.
It's just that Sam Raimi likes to do it usually for comedic effect.
Yeah, it's in a much more frenetic sort of style, but yeah, I totally see what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. It's just a guy who is just, I would say, night and day as far as the kind of stuff they like to put out there between Sam Raimi and Alfred Hitchcock, and yet you could see the influence there. He was, and this is where I would love to have Lance, because he could talk about people that I've never even heard of, but I see that, and you see it in other way, other times as well, where Hitchcock made the camera an active participant instead of just a recorder of what was going on. And it was such a groundbreaking way.
I think you see it towards the end of Evil Dead, where you're following the camera as it's approaching the house, and the way it's shot, I mean, it looks really creepy.
Yeah. So and I don't think he's unique in that. I think that another guy that I would say took influence definitely from this movie, but I think from a cinematic style as well, is Wes Craven. So I think Wes Craven, obviously he stole several lines from Psycho, and they're in Scream, so which is crazy. Sometimes people go a little crazy. That's in this movie, also the talking about the love of a son for their mother. I mean, he basically paraphrased that line right out of Psycho into Scream for Billy Loomis. So
I believe author Sam Hamm, when it came to writing the first Batman movie, said, like, if you're going to steal from the best, because a comic author called him out on that.
Yeah, Loomis has to be the most stolen horror name in the world. I mean, you have Loomis from Halloween, you have Billy Loomis in Scream. I mean, it's all over the place.
Yeah. So that said, I'm going to go to Mike now for Psycho. Influences on you, influences on the wider world, and you think that also the importance of this film as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you guys covered a lot of it. I would like to point out, I guess, you talked about how the camera work specifically played into how Psycho worked, and even the character himself, and that directly influences, for instance, with Michael Myers in the first Halloween. The camera is absolutely a part of Michael Myers. It is the music is in there, the walk is in there, but the camera work is absolutely a part of how we perceive Michael Myers. And it was the same thing with Jason in Friday the 13th, and even with his mother, Pamela Voorhees, in the first movie. The camera was actually part of it. You knew looking at, when they were looking at something, that it was the killer doing it. They designed it specifically to be that way, and that was really cool. One of the things, I mean, while it was very highly influential, Psycho on a lot of my favorite directors, M. Night Shyamalan, Wes Craven, John Carpenter, the list goes on and on. A lot of them point back to Psycho as their influence. In fact, I find this interesting. Psycho was a huge influence on Halloween, and Halloween was in turn a huge influence on the slasher genre. So it was like Psycho brought it in, and Halloween turned it up to 11 and passed it on, kind of an idea. I really like its influence. I really like the theater of the mind stuff. And really, one of the things that first grabbed me about Psycho was the editing. Alfred Hitchcock may have taken those shots for that shower scene, but you know what made that scene great? The editor.
Yeah.
doing those quick little clips. Not one time in that entire scene, not one time do you actually see the knife penetrate her flesh. Not
Nope.
once. There is one shot, count them, one shot where the knife is up against her belly, but it's not even the point. It's just up against it like this. I mean, it shows you just enough to let your own twisted mind fill in the blanks, and I love that.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially when added in with those kind of like chuck sound effects.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, I'm not going to go around the horn on this, but feel free to chime in. You did say one other thing that I want to highlight, which was music. Hitchcock thought that the music in this movie made the movie. And going forward from this movie, almost every classic horror franchise has music attached to it. I mean, music is important for all movies. Let's be perfectly clear. But every classic horror franchise, I mean, Friday or Halloween, kill, that
That's
one.
Friday the 13th.
That's Friday the 13th.
Friday 13th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why am I blanking on Halloween? John Carpenter always does Halloween music.
The 5/4 time.
Nightmare on Elm Street, da, 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 da. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they're all there, so I don't think you can underestimate the music for this movie. And I know a small piece of trivia, Alfred Hitchcock, who was notoriously stingy with his crew and his actors and everything, was so pleased with the music on this film, he doubled the salary of the composer.
Do you know
the music.
Bernard Herrmann? Yeah. And he's a guy who went back with Hitchcock for some time. He did the theme for North by Northwest as well.
Now, do you know the story about the shower scene?
No, enlighten us.
Okay. Hitchcock initially wanted this to be very visceral. He did not want any music on the shower scene. And the composer, everybody kind of talked behind his back. It's like, this scene would be more effective with some really jarring music. And so the composer created some music. They shot the scene as Hitchcock wanted. It gets edited. He's watching it, and he realizes he's made a mistake. It doesn't work without the music, or it works, but it doesn't have quite the impact he wants to. It's like, they're like, hey, Hitch, we got something to show you. And they play the next reel. And it's the scene with that jarring, piercing, nerve-jangling music. And he was like, okay, you guys were all right. I'm glad you were right and I was wrong.
And the amazing thing is that everyone, I would say most people in the world today, my children have never seen Psycho. I've never shown it to them. But they would, all of them know, read. Right. I mean, it's just in the zeitgeist. Everybody knows it, and they know exactly what you're talking about.
Because there are definitely movies out there. I remember in film class, one of the films we watched, I don't remember the name right now, is a Paul Newman film with him as a lawyer, an alcoholic lawyer. But the majority of that film has absolutely no music, and it kind of grounds it in a way. It sets it in a real world. It's there's so little music in it. I initially thought that there was no music, and then the teacher was like, "Oh yeah, there's actually some music." I went back, "Oh, okay, you're right. It's just just get used to it not being there." But we all know how impactful music is for this, and what would Jaws be without that tone? The John Williams Jaws theme, letting you know when you can't see the shark is out there waiting on you.
John Williams is a legend, and I
kind of want to share for a minute, some of the stuff Bernard Herrmann did, just to give you an idea of how well respected this guy was. He did the themes for things like Citizen Kane, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and Vertigo. He did a Taxi Driver, Cape Fear, and Anna and the King of Siam. I mean, this guy got around, and he did a lot of different kinds of movie.
Yeah, I will say that for me, I think next year we're going to devote a month to John Williams movies, because I kind of look at John Williams the same way. From everything that he has done, I think the man is just a legend. And it sounds like this composer was the exact same way. It's like, I don't think it could be overstated. So
if I could comment real quick just on the music thing.
Yeah, go for it.
I think music is really so key in a movie, because without that, we don't necessarily know how to feel about the scene we're watching without the music to really tell us. For instance, just a little quick side story about Halloween there. John Carpenter showed a version of Halloween to an executive before he added the music to it. She said, "This isn't scary at all. It does nothing for me." Then she saw it with the movie and said it was with the music, and it was the scariest movie she had ever seen, because it tells you how to feel. It lets you know what kind of intensity is in each scene.
Plus, and Jeff, I'm sure can correct me here if I'm wrong, but in music theory, there are certain chords that actually push in our brain and elicit certain emotions, whether we know it or not. So
these reflect certain sounds that we've become accustomed to in nature. Sounds that would give you pleasure or sounds that warn you of danger. And people who understand sound design and music, especially music for movies, who want to lead you emotionally down a path, they understand what these chords and key changes are and how to use them appropriately.
Yeah. So, I mean, that I think is just huge. I mean, I remember watching for The Dark Knight Returns when they came up with that music that always came up when Heath Ledger's Joker came up. And, they deliberately used it to give you a certain, creep factor to him, whether his, even though
I would put Hans Zimmer up there with Herman and John Williams as well.
Definitely.
I think a movie can work with limited music, because I have seen a few that do. But we have become, it's kind of like, Lance is always going on about film. We've become so used to seeing film grain that to him, an aficionado of film, he doesn't like seeing the digital stuff because he's missing that film grain that's in there. And so we've also become very accustomed to musical cues. So when you see a film without the musical cues, without that to lead you in the direction that the creators of the film would like you to go, they can't count on you to necessarily make the proper leap. So the music leads you as much as the visuals.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, let's go ahead and get into I'm going to describe the plot of the movie for everyone who hasn't seen it real quick. And then I kind of want to go around the horn and talk about the performances.
Bitch be stealing, then she'd be dead.
At the same time, yeah. So now I think it's interesting what Jeff said, because I'm the same way. I told everyone before they came on that I hadn't seen this movie since I think 1985, and I forgot a lot of what happens in this film and how long it is before we see Norman Bates even into the movie. I forgot that we had the whole affair scene, and we had her stealing the money, and so she steals this money from her boss and decides to join her lover in California from Arizona so they can get away because he has debts. And Hitchcock, whether we know it or not, is building up our suspense this whole time, because she has this almost manic fear of everything. Everything is a potential, because she has this guilty conscience. She's going to be found out. And she's going over conversations that may or may not be really happening in her head about what's going on with people. And so it's building suspense in us through the whole movie. And then finally, she is caught on the road in the rain, and she pulls into the Bates Motel, and Norman Bates. And Norman Bates is a whack job. That the Brad Pitt's detective from Seven is absolutely right about Norman Bates here. He's a complete whack job, So
does that include the smearing with the peanut butter?
Yes. Man. I had another conversation with an army buddy of mine about peanut butter a while ago, and you know what? We're not even going to get into it. Yeah, because that was a real Carlsbad moment as well. So that said, so we find out that Norman is a little off, but he seems to be mostly harmless for a while there. But he reacts very violently to a certain line of questioning and some comments from Janet Leigh's character.
Marion Crane.
Yeah, Marion Crane. And so right there, there's some alarm bells going off for us. And one of the things I like is that this seems very believable. I mean, she is in a bad position, but she's not stupid. She doesn't act stupidly. And I go back to Screamfest. I watched one horror film where the characters just acted very stupid, and it's frustrating, because I don't think it has to be that way. As writers, we could set up situations where people are in danger without being dumb about it, you know. But I digress. So Norman is attracted to her, and then his mother, quote unquote, comes down and slays her in the now infamous shower scene. And so the people want their $40,000 back, and her sister, Marion Crane's sister, is looking for her, and they find her lover, Sam Loomis. No,
Sam
is
Loomis.
that right?
Yeah, it was Loomis. Yeah.
Sam Loomis, who owns a hardware store in Fairville. And the really sad part is, I didn't realize that she was only like 15 or 20 miles from the store, you know, and she stopped at a hotel, which is just really sad if you stop and think about it. And so a detective comes in, and they're looking for her, and the detective eventually finds his way to the Bates Motel, and he ends up on the end of the mother's wrath. And long story short, we come to find out that Norman killed his mother and her lover 10 years prior, and that pretty much created a psychological break in him. And from that moment on, he had two personalities, and the dominant personality within him was his mother. And so he was, you know, and he was projecting feelings of jealousy that he had towards his mother, back, you know, reciprocating backwards from his mother back to him. And there's a lot going on in this movie. I'm going to let you guys expand on that. Suffice it to say that this pretty much established Anthony Perkins, though, as Norman Bates for all time, to the point where I really felt bad that Vince Vaughn tried to play Norman Bates in a remake of Psycho, because there was no way he was ever going to be truly successful at that.
The mistake there was trying to recreate it shot for shot when they should have tried to do their own thing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I will say that there were subsequent Psycho movies. I've never seen any of them.
Psycho 2 is actually quite good.
Is it?
I like Psycho 2.
It's a good sequel.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it actually gives you a nice kind of follow up on Norman's story.
I may have to check that out sometime. So, with that very brief synopsis of what was going on, I'm going to go with Jeff first, and then I'll go to Mike and Steve. Talk a little bit about the plot and how it built, but also performances within that plot, and how Hitchcock used those characters and those talented actors and actresses within his film, you know?
Yeah, one of the things I love watching this film again and rediscovering things, because if you don't see film for a long time, you know, some of it kind of like gets lost in the fog of memory, and you rewatch it's like, oh yeah, this is so great. The Marion Crane, you know, desperately in love with this fellow who's trapped in a divorce that just seemingly never ends. He's got financial debt, alimony. He's in other sorts of debt, which you believe is related to the failed marriage. And she just desperately wants to be, a wife, and I'm sure hopefully one day a mother. You know, it's kind of the American dream for most women at that period of time in their life, in that period of time in the United States. And so she's got all this, and you know, her boyfriend just keeps telling her, you know, there's all this stuff in the way, and she's desperately going after it. So you see her desperation to be with this man, and even though he wants to be with her, there's all this weight on him that he doesn't feel that he can give her what she would deserve as his wife. So you immediately start out really feeling for these two characters. So you feel like, oh, you know, I'm on Marion's side here. You know, like I like this person. I can see her struggles. You know, I'm sure people of the day could relate to that. And then this rich oaf just comes like flirting his head off with her and flashing all this money practically under her nose. And he's like, you know, money can buy all the happiness. It can solve all the problems, and that kind of earworms in her head. And now one of the interesting things Hitchcock did is, in the scene where she's in the hotel with her lover Sam, she's wearing white. She is still pure. But when she decides to take the money, when she's fleeing town, she is now dressed in black undergarments. She has had a change. She is stained. She is corrupted. And you say she's not stupid. And I don't think she is stupid, but she makes a lot of stupid mistakes on the way because she is overburdened with all this guilt. She practically screams at the cop's face like, I am guilty of something. And she does the same thing when she decides to buy a different car. It's like, hey, yeah, I just want to pay you cash for this car. Like in the modern days, we're like, yeah, man, you got drugs in that car. What's going on? You know, something's up. Something's up. Wait, is there a body in that trunk? I got to know. You know, because everything she's doing just screams, I am guilty, guilty, guilty. And everybody who interacts with her knows this until you get to Norman. And she's kind of had a little bit of time to sort of get a grip on herself. And then you start liking the character again because she starts relating to Norman. Because we don't know at the time, Norman's got his own guilty secret, but we do know that he is being abused. And she sees somebody who is also desperate. And there's this wonderful connection between the two of them, even though people would probably look at Norman now in the context of knowing what the film's about, like, oh, you know, Norman's creepy. But he doesn't come across that way. He comes across as like awkward and lonely and abused, and he's just trying to do the best he can, and he's guilted into taking care of his mother, although we don't know why at the time. But they make this little connection, and there's this beautiful moment when he's talking about the traps that we're in, and she says, you know, sometimes it only takes just one, and you know, I'm going to get up early, and I'm going to see if I can get myself out of the trap that I put myself in. And as an audience member, you cheer for her. You're like, yes, we want you to go back and do the right thing. You messed up, but it's not too late. You know, the bank, it's not Monday yet. The bank hasn't opened. They don't know you've got the money. You can still fix this. And then we find out Norman's a creep. And worse than a creep, you know, Mother comes in. And the setup for all of this, when you go back and watch it, and you can see all these delightful little setups when he talks about like taxidermy is his hobby, and a boy is a mother's best friend. All these little lines he's dropping, all these little ticks that, as somebody who studied some psychology, you know, you start picking up on a repeat viewing. Like, oh man, like, yeah. Oh, she is in such trouble. She doesn't even know because she's too guilty to see all the red flags herself. And you know, everything else that comes afterward, it's good. But for me, the best part of the movie is the build up to it and watching her character, because the rest of it becomes, you know, basically sort of a generic sort of detective story, other than like Norman being Norman. Norman being Norman past that point really is very, very watchable. The way he frets as he's getting rid of the evidence, and by the time he's getting rid of Arbogast's car, you know, and Sam's out there like, you know, Arbogast, and you see Norman, he's just kind of like looking out from the swamps, like, yeah, I wonder if this is going to be the third car I'm going to have to get rid of. You know, he's just kind of dialed into like, yeah, murder's kind of my thing.
Yeah.
But maybe that was his mother at the time. I don't know. That didn't look like Norman that time. That could have definitely been his mother, because Mother was cold, calculating, and ruthless. So I could actually go back and watch it again and try and figure out like these moments where we see Norman and like, is that actually Mother there? It's a wonderful piece of film to dissect, because there's Hitchcock is just not just the master of suspense, but he's the master of character and layers to the plot and the characters in the story.
Now, I do think this is one of these movies that it never quite has the same impact on you emotionally as the first time you watch it, because you know what's coming. You know, the first time you watch it when you don't know what the twists and turns are going to be, it's much more shocking, you know. So definitely. And you know, maybe having seen everything now, if I was watching it the first time, I would have been able to predict. But I remember watching this as a kid, and you know, the whole revelation about Norman came out of left field for me. You know,
well, I will say, it's just a final thought. All of the characters, from the supporting characters on down to some of the smallest moments that people have in the film, they all come out as really, really genuine. Everybody feels super real. You know, the sheriff talking about like, oh, I don't want to call him at this time of night, and even like the used car lot guy, you know, watching him so eager to sell the car and then get suspicious, and right up until the psychologist at the end, where he's so excited because he's got a DID case. He's so excited to have it. He's like, explain. Yes, and there's two personalities at war within this one mind, and then one supplants the other. You know, he's saying all this to Janet Leigh's sister, and like, you're horrifying her, man. But he's so lost in the excitement of like the psychological discovery that is going on. But that feels really, really true to the character. So Every bit
And
of
then-
it. All the actors do a fantastic job.
And there are quite a few very good character actors in this film who would go on to have long careers in TV, including several of them were in multiple episodes of The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, the Night Stalker movies and series. So yeah, they took this and ran with it for their career. So going to Mike, what you think about the plot of the movie, the acting performances of the movie? How does it, any of your thoughts on that? Your thoughts on the writing and the way it built up suspense, those types of things.
All right. I gotta say, Marion Crane didn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Okay.
I didn't get the whole. I mean, she admits that her life is no worse than anybody else's. The guy talks about how money can make her happy, and I didn't get the impression that was necessarily a thought she was having up until that point. It wasn't even something she had considered before. I didn't. What I couldn't wrap my head around was why she took the money to begin with. Maybe it's in part because I wouldn't have taken it if it was 10 million, regardless. Especially not if it was just 40,000. I mean, I wouldn't have taken the money.
I don't know how much that was back in the day.
$30,060.
Right? I can't wrap my head around what she was thinking there. It wasn't going to help her with her situation with Sam. She talked about wanting to get a private island. She definitely couldn't afford a private island with $40,000. Even if she went to one, it wouldn't be secretive. She'd have to live on it with other people. So it's not like she would be hiding there. It's like she went into the whole thing with the forethought of a teenager. She just didn't think about it at all or put anything into her plan. And I couldn't wrap my head around that. And then I thought people kind of jumped to conclusions, or they already had their own thought about what was going on with her in their mind before they came up to her. I mean, really, Marion didn't do anything but sleep in her car. And that cop was all over her she might have been acting suspicious, but she didn't do anything. She didn't do anything wrong. There was no reason for him to follow her into town. I
disagree. I think the cop acted 100% appropriately considering how squirrely she was being.
Yeah,
I mean, this is what cops are trained to do. They're trained to sniff out trouble.
See, I agree as well. And also, $40,000 in 1960 money is about $400,000 now. So
right, but I wouldn't have taken it regardless of it. Regardless of my situation, I would look at that. I would think if that thought even crossed my mind, it would immediately set up alarms of nothing but trouble.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
It's like you said, it's not a well thought out plan because obviously everybody's going to know who took it. How's this going to fix anything? So it's a really impulsive move, and that's why she's so guilty and squirrely, and she gives herself away time and time again until she finally gets to Norman and starts acting like a normal person again.
Well, all right, but there are a lot of people that, me included, that if just talking to a cop can make you nervous because they're looking for reasons to bust you.
What are you hiding, Mike?
I think this goes back to that first scene though, where she asks, she wants to get married to Sam. And Sam says he can't do it right now because of all the debt he's in from alimony and everything else that he has to pay. And so I think when this money comes into her life, she's faced with a moment of temptation. And
she thinks she can pay off his debt and then maybe they can get married?
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, that's what I took from it.
But that still wouldn't work because, all it takes is to put out the APB and then somebody finds her in California and hauls her back.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the greatest thought out plan, but she's obviously not a career criminal here because just driving down the road, she's freaking out. She is not a criminal. And I think that goes back to what Jeff was talking about, her redeeming moment when she realized, you know what, I'm not a criminal. I've got to go back.
I honestly would love to have heard what spiel she was going to say when she went back to town. I'm dying to hear that line.
Well, now this gets into, the time. There were times back then where you could go back and the police would be like, hey, no harm, no foul. We're not going to press charges. Nowadays, people are just like, to hell with you. You're going to jail. So we are
I mean,
not like that.
It is surprising. I mean, because the bank and the client of the bank, both of them decided just to send a PI out after her instead of informing the law right away.
Yeah, and a little bit of this
they didn't want to press charges.
Yeah, and a little bit of this honestly goes back to the way that women were looked at back at the time. I mean, I could see it definitely being reasonable, where it'd be like, oh, you're just an illogical woman who was doing something emotionally out of love, and
if it had been a guy, they'd have sent the police out after him right away.
His ass would have been shot. So,
hold on just a second, guys. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah.
You're going up the river, Sam. You done made a mistake, Sam. You shouldn't have taken the money, Sam.
Yeah. So let's go to Steve real quick while we're waiting.
It's the big house for you.
Steve,
all right. Sorry about that.
No problem. What did you think about the plot and the characters in the movie?
Oh, I wasn't actually done yet.
Go ahead, Mike. Keep going there.
Okay. I also thought that the investigator, as well as Marion's sister and her boyfriend, went into that situation with the idea that Norman was guilty. He was. I'm not saying that he wasn't. But they went into that situation, like her boyfriend in particular was sitting there trying to put words in his mouth, trying to set him up. Like, well, you feel this way, don't you? I know you feel this way, so you must want to do this. And he was all just putting stuff in his mouth. He wasn't saying anything.
Yeah, but look at the evidence he's got to go ahead. You've got a hotel that's off the main path. It's not getting any customers. And so he's thinking he's making logical jumps. He's making deductive jumps. And
he's the last person to see her alive.
And he's the last person to see her alive. So he's already got antipathy built up. So
I will say
I'm not surprised by his reaction.
I will say that the detective, especially for the time and the way detective shows and everything, the detective reads fully believable to me. Sam seems a little bit, white knighty with the guy with the white hat on. It's still believable to a certain extent, but he's like hyper aggressive.
Yeah.
Now
his girlfriend's been missing for a week. He's pretty upset at this point.
She's probably dead. I mean, he wants his pound of flesh from Norman.
And this is the John Wayne era of men.
Yes. Now, if I was Norman, I would have told him to get the hell. Yeah, I would have called the police on him and had the police come and take him off my property. Some type of thing. But no, Norman's not in his right mind. But Sam always played a little bit like hero-y to me, but not. It didn't stand out to me that it ruined the film. But the detective, Arbogast, seemed perfectly reasonable to me.
The detective wasn't that bad, but he was definitely suspicious, and I didn't think Norman was necessarily acting suspicious.
Yeah, but Arbogast came on the scene looking at everybody suspiciously. First, he's looking at Marion's sister suspicious. She's looking at Sam suspicious. Everybody has to be suspicious in his line of work until you kind of eliminate them.
Well, I will say, though, that I think the detective's suspicions were aroused. And he didn't even have a huge amount of suspicion. It's just he smelled something off when Norman contradicts himself because he says that no one had been in the hotel, and then
and then last week someone came by and couldn't see.
He was forced to change the story.
But I like the way Arbogast kept playing that up too. It was like, like this. Oh yeah, sure. He didn't go the aggressive route like Sam did. He was always trying to smooth things over, but still trying to get that information out of him.
And even when Arbogast calls Sam and I can't remember the sister's name, Vera Lynn's character, Lila, when he calls the two of them, he says that I think everything checks out here. It's just that I've got a sneak, like a bad feeling that there might have been something going on. So even then, he's not really super suspicious of them. The thing is that once he disappears, because he says he's going back up to the hotel, I think that's when Lila and Sam really got their go up and really were like, something's going on over there. But
my only problem is like nobody really seems to think of, if somebody took out the trained detective, who is used to, dealing with all these things, what chance do Joe Blow have in catching this guy?
Yeah. My last real quick point is as far as the writing goes, I love how, granted this was based on a book, but I love how,
this was Robert Bloch, wasn't it?
Yeah. I really love how closely I mean, they changed little things, of course, to fit it into the movie. But it is amazing how many things Ed Gein and Norman Bates have in common. I mean, I could read you a list if you want to hear
You
it.
know, come to think of it.
There are amazing things, and actually, I wanted to comment earlier. You mentioned that perhaps Norman's mother personality came out because she was jealous. In the case of Ed Gein, his mother believed that every woman, of course, her except her, of course, was ridiculously promiscuous and an instrument of the devil. They were flat out evil. I mean, her mother actually saw a guy beat a dog to death and was more upset that the guy had a woman in his house that he wasn't married to. I mean, that kind of thing. Okay,
that sounded like the mom from Waterboy for a second. Girls are the devil.
Kind of. It's just like that. But I mean,
Bobby Boucher.
Especially if you listen, I invite you to look up the things that we know about the Ed Gein case, and then watch that movie again, and particularly listen to the psychologist's description at the end. How many things correlate? Like, for instance, did you know that they mentioned at the end of the movie that, for instance, Norman might have killed two girls that have gone missing?
Yep.
Well, check this out. In the last 10 years, if you figure Psycho took place in 1960, within that last 10 years, Ed Gein had killed 2 young girls in 54 and 57. So it's like they're just lining it up.
See,
I wonder if Block was really a student of the case.
Mike, now pay attention, because Mike is a big student of serial killers. So,
Why do you guys hide, Mike?
Yeah.
Why you get so nervous around cops, Mike?
Yeah.
Mike, don't look under my trailer.
Do you have a bog?
So much lie, Mike?
Do you have a bog in the backyard, Mike? Is that a wig I see? Uh-oh.
He's always putting lye under his house.
Yeah. Steve, to you now on the plot and the characters. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you covered the Marion story pretty well. I think some of it is like you really kind of benefit from the rewatch, because then you start to understand like what's going on in Marion's mind. Yeah, I think absolutely it was because she wanted to be with Sam, and she thought that, okay, if I get this money, maybe he can pay off his alimony debts and we can live, happily ever after somewhere. And she was basically tempted by this impulse decision to take the money since it was there. It's like, okay, since I have the money and I can make a run for it, and maybe we can live the life we want to live. And I just think it was a very poorly thought out thing. And yeah, I think a lot of time for the rest of her part in the movie, she makes a lot of really bad decisions because she's a terrible liar. She's not a good criminal. Because she's by nature, for the most part, honest. It's just that she was tempted with this one weakness that she had. And she kind of took advantage of it without really thinking about it. And so her whole story is about, in any other movie would have been about, okay, I realized I was wrong. This experience made me rethink everything, and now I'm going to go and go back and make restitution. And the sad thing is, she never has the chance to do that because her life is cruelly snuffed out by Norman Bates. And I think that really gets, and I love the way that her character is built, because you care about Marion Crane. And when she dies, you see the lost potential of a life that could have been something, if not for the fact that, she crossed the wrong path. And the other part of it is that, she is so suspicious of everything, except the things she should be suspicious of. Yeah. Because all she's thinking about is somebody coming for the money, or, it's the cops coming in, to try to take me in for what I did because I know I'm guilty. But she's not seeing over here, like the psychotic murderer who dresses up like his mother and goes slashing people in their bathrooms. And I just think that's a believable blind spot. And no, I don't think that she's stupid either. I think she kind of falls into a trap, thinking that, oh, the cop told me, oh, you should go into a hotel, because that's safe. It turning out that this was like the worst hotel that you could possibly have parked at, that you could possibly have slept at, but she's like, I don't want to drive anymore because it's raining, and I could get in more trouble if I leave. So, she's sort of like, okay, I this guy's creepy, but I'm just going to go and sleep in here until early tomorrow morning, and I'm going to run off. I think that was her plan. That's not an unreasonable plan, except she didn't really count on Norman Bates being a complete psycho killer. Yeah. Everything else from there, I think, is the typical Hitchcockian suspense thing, where the audience knows everything, and you're just kind of waiting for the characters to go through their emotions. And because you know everything, it's like, when Arbogast goes into the main house, it's like, okay, you know that Norman, or at least the mother, killed Marion. So that he's probably going to end up in big trouble, and he might very well end up dead. And that's exactly what happens. He ends up dead. That kind of stuff is really, really well done. And the only other thing that's kind of like remaining is that the first time you're watching it, you don't really get the nature of Norman's psychopathy, basically. And so because of that, it's very easy to kind of be taken aback if you've seen it for the first time and you're not aware of the spoilers. So I think that kind of stuff works, but I think but I agree with Jeff that the real character building stuff, the stuff that sticks with you, is the first half of the movie with Marion, because that really makes you care about her. The other parts don't really make you care about Lila or about Sam that much. It's more that we care about Marion and we want to get justice for Marion. And I think that's kind of what pulls you through that, and the whole suspense angle, with the fact that some of the secrets that the characters don't. And then Hitchcock does the usual thing where he takes advantage of that expectation, for the purposes of suspense, and that works very, very well.
I will say, though, that, I think that when I was talking about her not being stupid, I mean that she's not doing the stuff that bugs the hell out of me. And so
the horror movie tropes.
Yeah. Yeah. Where it's like, that there's a killer out there and there's a sound at the door, and you decide to walk outside in a towel, wet, and go, who's there?
Yeah.
And the door locked behind me.
There's none of this stuff where let's split up so that the killer can take us all out one by one,
Yeah.
And all this other nonsense. Yeah.
It's not for the running car. Let's hide behind the chainsaws.
Yeah. And
let's use the Ouija board.
Yeah. And I think your point makes even more sense there, which is, on first viewing, we're put in, knowing basically what Marion knows about Norman. And so even though she's in there and she's getting some red flags from Norman, I think that what she's getting from him is, this is a guy with mommy issues. And he's a little creepy, but she's going to lock her door, sleep in tonight, and then go on her way. Looking back in hindsight, we're all sitting there waving the red flag going, get the hell out of there, lady. This is a psycho, But
they do. Hitchcock does a good job of even making Norman sympathetic up to that point, and even after the murder. He's like, oh, God, mother, the blood. And then, him trying to clean up for this abusive, overbearing mother, because that's the only person he's got in the world, you think. It's amazing how the film gives you basically 3 points of view. And even though the other characters, their point of view isn't as strong, Norman, for a time, kind of becomes the hero of the piece, and that was just brilliant.
Well, I will also say that a lot of that is due to Anthony Perkins. Mm-hmm. Anthony Perkins' look, he looks innocent a lot of the time, and yet his face can take on a very cruel and evil look, or sadistic look as well. So he's got great facial acting in there. But his mannerisms, his way of speaking, he's brilliant in this film. He really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was little stuff too, like when she invited him into the room to eat that first time, and he took that step, and then you see him almost kind of shake a little bit and then back up. Yeah. Like little stuff like that. I mean, just perfect.
He is so good. Now, who did the voice of the mother? I don't know that. Do you guys know that?
I don't know off the top of my head.
It wasn't Anthony Perkins, though, right?
No. I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, that was a legitimate woman doing the voice.
Okay. So we've gone a little long, but I think we've had a great discussion. The way I want to end this is, I think this is such an iconic movie that and I'm so happy that Mike has been here with us. And Mike, if you have any more free time for the rest of the month, please come back.
Yeah, it turns out there were 3 people that played the voice of the mother.
Oh,
They
wow.
list Virginia Gregg, Paul Jasmine, and Jeanette Nolan.
Wow.
Huh.
Okay.
Made uncredited appearances.
And that's probably why I couldn't find them. What I do want to say, though, what I want to do, the way I want to go out is, I want you all, and I will do this myself as well, share with me and our audience the most iconic scene or line from the movie that sticks with you. What is your favorite scene or line from the movie that sticks with you? And we've gone around the horn, so I'm going to go to Mike first.
Well, I mean, I'm afraid I have to go with the most obvious one. We all go a little mad sometimes. I particularly love that when Billy Loomis quoted it in Scream. I really like that. You know, I mean, a lot of people want to look at the people who are mentally unstable and kind of, you know, at arm's length, like you got, but really, all of us do go a little mad sometimes. It's not just the crazy people, if you know what I mean. I just really appreciated that.
No, that's a great line, and it was a great use in Scream. It's a great homage as well. I think it was well done, and like Jeff said, if you're going to steal from someone
the
great.
best. That's
yeah.
right.
So
Yeah.
Steve, favorite line or scene from the film?
Yeah, I think it's the obvious scene is the shower scene. I mean, I don't think that you're ever going to see too many scenes that have that same amount of impact that have been repeated as often as they have. You know, and I think the other reason why I think it really works is because it's a moment where she's at her most vulnerable, you know, and she thinks she's in perfect safety, and yet, you know, this is kind of the moment of her demise. And I think that combination of vulnerability, you know, the sense of safety, and turning out to be a false sense of security, and she is, in fact, at the most dangerous she's ever been in. I think that juxtaposition really plays well off each other. I think the way the blood is handled is very well done, and I agree with Mike that the editing of that particular shot is a large part of the reason why it works as well as it does. So yeah, I'm going to go with that.
And I would also add, I think the sheer visceral nature of her falling dead with her floor at that awkward angle really brought some finality to it. And I thought that was unusual for 1960 as well. So the whole thing is, but Jeff, favorite line or scene from the film?
I'm a little torn between 2 particular moments. Part of the shower scene for me, watching it, I thought they did something, and then I kept watching the scene, so I don't know if they started this, but like when she has that hand out as she's slumped into the shower, and there's that kind of desperate hand reaching out for help, and it finds the shower curtain and it pulls it off, and when she falls to the floor, we're right there. We transition from the drain to her eye, and the camera turns like the water going down the drain, and her eye doesn't move. Now, it's very hard not to move your eye. So I thought, like, okay, they've got a still frame and they're just rotating that. But then as they get to her, we expand out and we see her on the camera. I see a drip of water fall off of her hair. And I was like, did she manage to hold her eye perfectly still that whole time? Holy cow, that's amazing.
I honestly thought they had to have like a contactor in there or something. I mean, that eye looks dead. There's nothing. There's no life in that eye. It doesn't look like it.
I do wonder if part of that is just a still frame and then they cut, because I did watch to see some sort of movement, and I do catch one drop of water coming off of her hair.
Crazy.
And I was like, whoa.
And some of it is that Janet Leigh is just that good.
I guess so. I mean, damn.
Yeah, because one of the hardest things to do in a movie is to play dead, not to move at all. You have to breathe,
but not to move your eye. Your eye does little twitches or something.
Like when I go to the eye doctor and they tell you to look at the little red dot, I'm constantly like trying to keep my eye in one position, and it's just going all over the place. And the other thing that always strikes me visually is the reveal of Mother, and as she slowly turns around in the chair, and you get that reveal, and the sister smacks the light bulb as she reels back in horror. And you get that great effect of those the open mouth, the sunken nostrils. the missing eyes, the cavernous spaces in the skull, and that light just shifts in and out, creating these pools of darkness and those hollows as the light is swinging.
So
I love that image.
Classic Hitchcock. Hitchcock. For me, we talked a little bit about this came on air. I am a sucker for evil looks. It's something I like to write about.
That ending smile.
And the ending of The Omen with the little kid Damien as he turns back.
That's a good one.
And so, but that whole scene for me, it is so psychologically creepy. To me, it makes the movie. I know all the other stuff is huge. Yeah, but that line stuck with me as a kid. And the first time I watched this movie, I was very young. And we've already established that my parents did some very serious psychological damage to me by letting me see Psycho, like when I was like 7 or 8 years old. So
then I'm a seriously damaged dude. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
I can't blame my family because I stayed up way too late. They couldn't hang with me, and I would catch all this crazy stuff like The Exorcist on HBO.
Well, I used to watch them with my mom and my aunt all the time. We used to watch all.
I was like 8 years old. I'm watching The Exorcist. What the hell?
Yeah, but yeah, that scene always sticks with me. And then just to see the evil workings on Anthony Perkins' face with that smile, and to know that serial killer is still in there. And that's why, to be honest with you, I never watched any of the other Psycho movies, because to me, that's all I needed to know. All I needed to know was that Mother was still in there, and I didn't want to see anything else. Now, on your guys' recommendations, which I very much trust, I'll go find Psycho 2 and watch it. But for years, that ending pretty much summed it all for me. And
mind
it was
you, that's perfectly fine. Like when I was watching Twin Peaks, after they resolved the whole thing with like Bob, the evil spirit, I stopped watching Twin Peaks. I decided that's the end of the story, and I didn't need to go into the next season.
I feel the same about Men Not the Devil and the Vampire Chronicles, as Mike does well.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to see that as a movie. Just, on the tangent, is Men Not the Devil, one of my favorite Anne Rice books. After the vampire was shot.
First third of that book is a real slog, though.
Yeah. Well, it is.
I want to say,
my feeling is like Lestat got his comeuppance. That's all I needed to know.
I want to say though about that last scene. It was the look in Anthony Perkins' eyes, but we talked about his mannerisms. He was sitting there kind of curled up in that position with how he tilted his head just slightly, and he was kind of looking over at you from the top. It was the whole thing. It was the eyes really sold it, but that whole position of the head slightly tilted with that little smile that just kind of creeps up there.
I got a question. Did that line originate? Is that where we get the phrase like, "Oh, she wouldn't hurt a fly"? Did it come from this movie, from this story?
I have no clue.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't think so. But
okay, because it's so iconic.
I will say I would love to have picked Hitchcock or Perkins' brain, though, because one of the things that really gives us that creep factor inside for whatever reason, or when things are twisted or uneven, and whether he did it intentionally or not, whether Hitchcock directed him to do it, everything like you were talking about, his smile is a little bit uneven. His stance is a little bit uneven. His head is tilted and down, and it's never on center. It's never symmetrical. And you're just like, dude, you're just everything wrong with the world is right there. So
and paired with that smug voice, they're like, and they won't know. I won't.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to move that fly.
Yeah. And then just a smile, and you're just like, ah.
Yeah. But I think it was Virginia Grigg that delivered that last mother speech.
Oh, God bless it. Yeah. That to me, I mean, everything else was creepy, but that was what always stuck with me. So for me as a kid, as a lover of horror movies as a kid, and then I would start writing my horror stuff, I was like, I'd always go back to Damien and The Exorcist and that slash smile and, The Omen, or in Psycho, all that stuff just always stuck with me. So, yeah, I'm the sick bastard I am thanks to those people. Thank you. Thank you for making me sick. So, we're all sick here. We're all a little sick here. We all go a little bad sometimes.
We all go a little sick sometimes.
Yeah. So,
So I guess I'm gonna have to put away my mom's clothes in the peanut butter, is what you're saying.
It puts the lotion on its skin, or else it gets the hose again.
you're not supposed to admit those things. We never know when the
Oh,
FBI.
I didn't. I was talking about somebody else.
Yeah, we never know when the
It was Patrick
FBI is
O'Leary.
watching.
Stay in your room, mother.
Disclaimer: all things revealed here are purely theoretical. Any Bureau of Investigation, don't pay attention to anything we say here, please. So
The opinions held by Michael Nunley are his opinions only and are not reflective on Cinema Crusaders.
exactly. Oh man. So on that note, I want to thank you guys so much. We're halfway through Halloween Movie Madness. Next week we'll be doing a John Carpenter film, In the Mouth of Madness. So really looking forward to that movie. Has one of my favorite
Did you know
actors in
blue
it.
was my favorite color?
I love Sam Neill. I love me some John Carpenter. So I can't wait to talk about that film.
Jürgen Frenchau.
Yeah,
So many
great.
good people.
Oh, just so good. And obviously, if you are free and you have time, Mike, you are more than welcome to join us as well. So, but I know you're a very busy man. So,
Yeah, I have not actually seen In the Mouth of Madness yet, so I'm actually tempted. I'm gonna have to get back to you about that during the week, though.
well, if you are tempted and want to join us, I can FBI tune out now. I can hook you up with that film. So
Okay.
I will get you that movie. So FBI, you can listen again. So on that note, I want to thank my co-hosts for joining me. Thank you so much, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, man.
No worries.
A lot of fun
man.
hanging out with my friends, talking movies, man.
Yeah, it was great. I just love your insight here, and you are always welcome as a guest, especially when we talk horror. But if you want to come on and talk other stuff with us, you are always welcome on the podcast because you have great insights, and it's great talking to you. So,
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
no problem. And we love the death metal scream too. So, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for joining us here for Psycho. And I know you're already gearing up for In the Mouth of Madness next week.
Oh, I am absolutely down for that. I'm looking forward to it. So, see you all next week. It should be fun.
Awesome. And as always, thank you to my right-hand man. I want to give a shout out real quick. Jeff is doing some amazing work as art director on Blood World. Blood World is coming. He is doing some outstanding work, and he's going a little mad over there, but that's fine, you know. So, but thank you.
We all go to
Jeff.
middle sometimes.
Yeah,
That's right.
and thank you for being here and sharing your insights with us as well.
Always a pleasure, man. I love talking all things geek, but I have a special love in my little black heart for that of the horror genre. And
Awesome.
I'm very much looking forward to next week. This film was my selection because I got a huge horror boner for both John Carpenter and all things Lovecraftian, and this gives me both in spades.
And on that note, make sure that you tune in for Jeff's horror boner next week. So until then,
No peanut butter.
Now,
Yeah,
what is it?
No peanut butter.
What is it? What is it? Guar used to call it? Oh yeah, the cuttlefish of Cthulhu.
yeah. Oh man.
Odorous as ungerous as penis. The cuttlefish of Cthulhu.
And if you don't have horror in your heart from that, you're a sick bastard just like the rest of us. So congratulations and welcome to the club. On that note, thanks everybody, and we will see you next week on Cinema Crusaders for more Halloween movie madness marathon. We're out, everybody.